guys, welcome to the 19th lesson of Blockstack plus React. On the previous lesson, we worked on the search input for a user and their post, and we also created the username post route configurations. In this lesson, we're going to be focused on profile error handling and dealing with empty posts in the username post routes. When the username route component mounts, it's going to fetch the user profile via Blockstack.js function called Lookup Profile. If the function returns a valid profile.json data, then we're going to load the user post. If the function does not return a valid data, then we're going to render an error card. We're also going to consider another scenario where a Blockstack user does exist, but he hasn't created any post. If a Blockstack user exists but did not create any post, we're going to display a message that lets the signed in user know. Let's do a further analysis on the lookup profile function that's coming from the Blockstack.js library. The lookup profile function is going to look up a user profile by their Blockstack ID, and in this case the Blockstack ID is whatever username that you've defined when you're creating a Blockstack user. And this is a promise, so you're going to have to make an asynchronous request to get that information. An example object that is returned when making this asynchronous request is shown in my next tab. What this information will show you are the apps, the social proofs, and other relatable information to that user. Now that we've got this context, let's work on the code and safeguard for these possible issues. In the username post routes component, I'm going to define 3 variables. The first one will be the error, which we will initialize with an empty string. Loading, and we'll set that to true. And lastly, we're going to create a variable called post and initialize it with an empty array. The error state variable will be the text that's shown to the user if an asynchronous request fails. The loading will be responsible for handling the front end in terms of when you make the asynchronous request, it wants to be loading and sending it back to false when the asynchronous request has finished, and post will save the list of posts after making that request. Just like before, we're going to use the component didMount lifecycle, and since it's going to be an asynchronous request, I'll put the async in the front. We will take out the match here, props, and then we'll say const username equals match.params.username. We'll create a try and catch block here to look up the user profile and say const profile equals await look up profile of the username. If the profile exists, then we're going to return a function called this.loadPost, which we haven't created yet. If the asynchronous request fails, then we're going to return this.setState. Error is equal to e.message, and we'll set the loading state variable to false. The e.message will be whatever is returned from the endpoint if the lookup profile fails. With that set, let's just create a dummy function for now called loadPosts. And eventually it's going to be an asynchronous function, so I'll just do that beforehand. And for now, I'm just going to say console.log loading the posts. With this plumbing complete, I want to create a separate component called a error component. And this is a component just dedicated to showing you the errors if an asynchronous request fails. So inside of components, I'm going to create a new folder called error. And inside of error, I'm going to create a component called index.jsx. This is going to be a super simple component. So first we're going to import React from React, import message from React Bulma components. With these 2 components, we could create a stateless component. So const error equals props message.header, say title. And here we're going to write message.body. Inside of the message.body will be a props.error message. We'll export default this, export default error. And we'll also include the prop types from prop types. We'll say error.proptypes error message is a string that's required. And I think that's good. Now that we have this component created inside of the error index page, let's use it in our username routes page. So here we can write import error from components error. Here we're going to add some kind of conditional that basically says if the error exists, then we're going to show the error. So if loading is completed and error exists, I apologize, we're gonna have to write this .state.loading. Then we're going to return the error component and pass in the error message, this.state.error. This should work, but let's go to the browser and confirm that if we search for a random user that doesn't exist in the Blockstack ecosystem, that it renders the error card. Currently, I'm on my browser with a valid Blockstack user ID. If I type in whatever I feel like, it gives me back a 400 response from the API, which is very good. So it's not the best error handling, but you can create a separate function that says if your response is 400, then render out some text indicating that a Blockstack user doesn't exist. But I just wanted to show you a possible way to notify to the user that a bad asynchronous request was made. We can even style this up a little bit more by going back to our component and giving the message component a prop of danger. What that will do is give our error component card some kind of red indicator that something bad happened. Now that we've handled the bad profile information, let's go to a scenario where a user exists but no posts were created. In the username post routes component, I'm going to get rid of this console log and destructure out the username via match. Set the username to this match.params.username. We're also going to take out the user session from this.context.state.current-user. With this information, we can make a fetch for the post of that user. And this is going to be a little bit different because when we make our get file request, previously before we were never defining a username in our options because it was implicit that when you make a get file that way, that the username is yourself. To emphasize this, I'm going to show you the options variable. And here we're going to write username. And then we're going to write decrypt false. So before, when we were looking at our own self as a user, we would always do const options equals decrypt false, and we would always omit the username. In this case, it's always fetching information about yourself. In this case, it's fetching information about a different user. If you need more information about how encryption and decryption works between other users, it is a bit more complicated and involves sharing of private keys, but we're not going to go over that in this tutorial. Now that we have the two variables defined, user session and options, we can make our appropriate fetch. We'll use a try catch block here. And we will make a asynchronous request called const posts equal await user session dot get file of the post file name and pass in the options here. If posts exist, then we're going to return this.setState of the posts of json.parse of the posts, and we'll set the loading to false. There's a bit of a weird gotcha on this get file, and if the get file fails, it doesn't return an e.message, but it just returns null. So in this case, we'll just create a custom message for the error handling and say loading is false, and we'll set the error to user does not have any posts. With that set, I believe that this conditional will satisfy both conditions. If a user doesn't exist, then we're gonna generate the error. If a user exists but doesn't have any posts, it should generate this error again. Let's go to our browser and see what happens. Currently, I'm on my own username posts, and since I'm a user and I created some posts, it's just showing me the post table. If I type in just some random text, it says bad response 400. If I type in an ID that I know exists in Blockstack but doesn't have any posts, it gives me the user does not have any post. This is exactly what we want and a great stopping point for this lesson. We've been able to handle two case scenarios. One where a user does not exist in the Blockstack ecosystem, and two, a user that exists in the Blockstack ecosystem but does not have any posts. In the next lesson, we're going to generate the post table if a user has posts within our application. And this might feel like a repeat of some of our previous lessons where we showed the post table component and looked at the post detail. But there might be a slight few differences between an admin looking at his own posts and someone that's just looking at public posts. Can't wait for the next lesson. See you then.